Hello and welcome to Apprenticeship Ready, a series of presentations created by CSR Scientific Training to help line managers, mentors, and colleagues of apprentices understand more about programs and what it takes to be successful. In this presentation, we're going to talk about successfully completing a program and give you a bit of information about the independent endpoint assessment process. So the first thing we'd like to look at is checkpoints. So every apprenticeship program has, for the majority of its time, a development or practical period where the apprentice is developing their knowledge, skills and behaviours to do with that particular standard in that particular job role. So whether it's in the healthcare science sector or whether it's a bench scientist or science manufacturing or a higher apprenticeship program like laboratory scientist, they'll be developing their knowledge, skills, and behaviours, creating a portfolio of evidence, and also completing qualifications that might be involved. Anybody that also needs English and maths would also have to take a functional skills exam and get through that before that they can move into their endpoint assessment window. In between the practical period and that endpoint assessment window is this really small checkpoint known as the gateway. So by the time somebody reaches gateway, they have to have developed all of their knowledge, skills and behaviours and be operating at the level of the apprenticeship in all of those. Plus they need to have completed all of the other mandatory elements of the programme to move through into their endpoint assessment window and take that final assessment test. So gateway, it's a checkpoint. Primarily, that's what it is. And it's a way of checking that the on-program or practical period is actually completed. One of the biggest signs of this is that the apprentice themselves puts their hand up and says, I am ready, I've completed everything I need to complete, and I would like to take my endpoint assessment. We also need to have the training provider, so ourselves, agree that we have completed all of the program elements and any qualifications. And finally, we also need the sign off of the employer, which is where line managers might come in and sign a document to say that they are happy that that apprentice has completed all of the elements and is working at the right level. So it is a checkpoint. So what we're looking for is to engage with an endpoint assessment organisation. So that's a separate independent organisation that will look to assess the apprentice that you've been supporting. In order for them to take that assessment, the endpoint assessment organisation will need to check all of these things already. So just before Gateway, the endpoint assessment organisation, or EPAO, will ask for a nomination in some cases, maybe not all of them, for a technical expert from the employer. So this is somebody that they've nominated that is competent and understands all of the technical features of the job role the apprentice is undertaking to support the endpoint assessment if necessary. So if there are some technical elements that the independent assessor isn't familiar with, they can come back to the technical expert and ask for their assistance. We'll also look at deciding on some provisional dates for the endpoint assessment to take place. And each endpoint assessment window can vary in length. For some standards, it might be 3 months, for others, 4 or even up to 6 months long. And we want to make sure that we've got a timeline identified that avoids any complications, things like annual leave and holidays that people might be taking. So during the gateway process itself, pull together all the information that we need, confirmation of any of the qualifications that have been completed, and also the completion of the portfolio of evidence. And that's the thing that testifies to their ability to work at the right level for the knowledge, skills and behaviours. We'll also then submit a series of planning documents which will help the apprentice and the employer understand what's going to take place during the endpoint assessment, how it will work, what the timings are, which hurdle of the assessment will take place first, second, and if there are 3, which one will be the final one. And we will also make sure that all the right signatures are on the paperwork and that the gateway sign off can be done and completed, and then we can actually put in the final date for the endpoint assessment so we know exactly when that will be. It may well be that during the endpoint assessment window that the apprentice needs to carry on doing some work. Now, this won't be new development, but it may well be that they're asked on particular apprenticeship standards to complete assessments leading up to their endpoint assessment day. So this could be completing scientific reports and submitting those. It might be compiling and submitting and sending off a portfolio which will be used to help in their assessment day. So all of those things will be clarified with the EPAO and CSR and communicated to you, the employer, as well as the apprentice, so that everybody knows exactly what they're doing. So who are these endpoint assessment organisations? Well, they're all regulated by Ofqual, and we will have chosen them because they're leaders in their field and because they're really supportive and communicate really well, and we believe they're the best at what they do. So in healthcare science sector, we use national schools. We also use Training Qualifications UK or TQ UK, Quantum Awards and Marshall Assessment. So those are the 4 EPAO partners that CSR Scientific use. So we also require all of those EPAOs to support your learners, your staff, by submitting documents, by delivering online training and awareness of the different assessment methods, and supporting us so that we can hopefully get the best out of the apprentices on the day. We also, if there are any changes, like to communicate with them in case things do change, that we're made aware of that in good time so that we can support the learners to be successful. They also talk to us about grades. So each individual apprenticeship standard has a slightly different grading system. Some of them, individuals might fail one or more elements of their endpoint assessment. They can pass or they can score a distinction. In other standards, they could obviously fail, pass, score a merit or a distinction for their final grade. So it's good that we're aware of what they need to do in order to score different grades and how each endpoint assessment organisation looks to score those grading documents and how the overall process works. So the best ways to help and improve grades and support apprentices during this final phase of their apprenticeship is really from the start. We make sure that there are links all the way through their programs to the endpoint assessment and that they're aware of it from the start. So some programs might be quite short, say 14, 15 months in duration. Others might be more than double that. But it's good that we make sure that everybody's aware that there is an endpoint assessment and that they are working towards that. So the other thing that we do is we make sure that we obtain mock assessments and example portfolios, and we have a really good understanding of how each endpoint assessment goes about its job and what they expect from people. Certainly, mock assessments, mock tests are really useful so that people can get into the swing of the types of hurdles that they need to get over in order to be successful. But we also make sure that the work that we do is discussed and it mirrors the type of assessments that are going to take place. So when we carry out observations in the workplace, it's a very similar process, a very similar feel to the type of observation that might take place for that individual during their endpoint assessment. When we're delivering professional discussions and talking to learners about their job role, their skills, it's done in a very similar way to what they can expect during their endpoint assessment. So we're always looking towards it from the very start of the program to make sure that it's at least familiar so that they can do the best that they can on the day. We also start talking to you and the learners about it from the start, but certainly more and more and much more focused towards the end of the program leading towards Gateway. So in the last couple of quarterly reviews, we'll have a very much focused view on the endpoint assessment and what's coming at us. It's important also from your own point of view that you understand that post-Gateway, there is also some time that that apprentice will need to prepare for their assessment. In some cases, it's quite a lot of time because they might be needing to create a research project and spend time doing that, then prepare a report based on that research and create a presentation to deliver for their endpoint assessment day. It's all part of the assessment process, and it needs to be calculated into your thinking about how much time that person will contribute day to day once they get through their gateway. So effectively, it's not over until they've finished their endpoint assessment. That's probably the best way to look at it. Okay, so finally, and you will see this from CSR, that we give people much more support during the lead up to their gateway, and past their gateway, we're still there supporting them. So the vocational skills coaches and the tutors will still be working with them, not developing new skills and knowledge, but making sure that the knowledge and skills they actually have are applied in the right way, and they've got the right amount of focus for their big assessment day. So once the endpoint assessment has taken place, there can be a period of time for which the evidence is taken away by the endpoint assessment organisation, and then it goes through their internal quality review processes before we get an actual result. In some cases, most often, it's somewhere between 15 and 20 working days from the date of their assessment that you will get a written confirmation of their results, and that will be sent to us as the training provider. It will also be sent out to you as the employer and the individual that's taken the assessment. Now, as I said, some people might fail, others might get different grades. There is no mechanism if somebody wanted to achieve a distinction but missed out and only scored a pass. There is no way that that person can retake it just to increase their grade. It's a one-time assessment on that day, and that grade is final. However, if there are any issues with the grades, if there is any concern about how the assessments have taken place, then please let us know. There are routes that we can go down to appeal results, or we can have the assessment materials remarked, re-looked at. And if there are any issues or concerns around the grade, we can go back to the endpoint assessment organisations and have a conversation with them about relooking at some of those things. It doesn't happen very often, but there is an avenue there for us to follow if we feel that there's been any issues during the assessment day. If we are happy with the results, then it's good to communicate that back to the endpoint assessment organisation. Otherwise, they're going to wait to claim the certificates until a certain amount of time has taken place if somebody wanted to question their results. So if you're happy, let them know. Obviously, if you score the highest grade possible, they'll claim certificates straight away. Nobody tends to appeal a distinction. But it can still take up to 9 weeks for a certificate to be sent out by the apprenticeship service. So it's not the endpoint assessment organisation creating the certificate. It's the apprenticeship service through the Institute for Apprenticeships and Technical Education. They'll create it and they'll send it out. It is probably also a good point for me to mention the fact that all of the apprenticeship programs are linked to professional recognition. And in our case, in most cases, it's the Science Council that underwrite those awards. And different professional bodies can then award apprentices on successful completion, things like registered science technician or registered scientist, or working up towards their chartered status, which obviously for most of the sciences, except for healthcare science, is something they might do. And within healthcare science, it might be working towards IBMS status. Finally, for the apprentices side of things, we also hold graduation events. So every year we hold an annual event, and that's usually in November. And this is for all of the apprentices that have graduated in that 12 months to come and be recognised and to celebrate their achievements. And it also gives us an opportunity to invite line managers and mentors along, and anybody that's been involved in their success to have that recognition. And it's a great day, and it's something which doesn't happen very often in training providers, but we make sure that that happens quite often. If you go to university, it's a very traditional thing, and individuals can miss out on that through their apprenticeship experience. So as I say, we host it centrally in the West Midlands at the Birmingham Science Museum, and hopefully you can all find the time to come along and celebrate with us. Moving on, post-apprenticeship, it might be a good opportunity for us to quickly just look at some of the progression routes. So as line managers and mentors, it might be a conversation that you have with an apprentice of what's next. So looking at level 2 healthcare science assistant, if somebody has completed that, they may look at moving up to a level 4 healthcare science associate, which is obviously a higher level. It's a longer course and it's more development for them. If they change and make a bit of a different focus, it might be more that a laboratory technician program would be a good move in terms of progression for them. Otherwise, it might be that somebody moves more into perhaps the quality side, quality assurance processes within the laboratories. And there is actually an apprenticeship standard which supports that. And that is at level 4, called the quality practitioner. Moving on to level 5, so somebody that might have done a level 3 program and look to progress, then they could move on to the technician scientist program. There's a bit more overview of managing processes. They may well be doing much more complex work and be involved in audits, both in terms of quality and perhaps health and safety within the lab, and they're carrying out a more senior function. There's also research projects involved in that as well, looking at lean and innovation and continuous development of process. Moving on from level 5, we've got a traditional degree level apprenticeship. And for those people that have already entered your organisation with a degree, perhaps a recent graduate, then they've already got that Bachelor of Science, perhaps. We can still put them onto an apprenticeship focused purely on the knowledge, skills and behaviours, reducing the time, but filling some of that gap that they may not have got through the experience of a vocational route coming through academia to develop the knowledge, skills and behaviours. Otherwise, quite most commonly, going into that with A levels, it would be a 5-year program. If you're topping up from the technician scientist, it will be a 3-year program. And if you're coming in at that program from the laboratory technician, it would be a 4-year program. So you can skip into year 2 with the work that's already been done. And then finally, at the highest level, we have the research scientist, the regulatory affairs specialist program, and there's also a bioinformatics program as well. Now, CSR scientific training don't run any of the level 7, but we can certainly have a conversation with you and identify some of those best-in-class providers for you to use and go to. Finally, your own CPD. So how can you progress your own development as a line manager or mentor of apprentices? There are some apprenticeship programs out there, relatively short compared to some. A good example is the Learning and Skills Assessor. For those of you that might be regularly assessing within the workplace, not just apprentices, but perhaps other people as well. There's a Learning and Skills Mentor, which would cover anybody in a line management or mentoring role so that they can support those individuals on those programs and other staff as well. It's great if you have an apprentice that you're mentoring or managing. That's really good for the program, but it might be outside of apprenticeships, and those are the types of people that you're supporting as well. So there are options out there for your own development, so look out for those as well. And if you're interested, please let us know and we'll talk you through it. So that's everything that we've got. This was the final of the 4 in the Apprenticeship Ready series. But if you haven't seen some of the others, there are obviously 3 others: the key milestones and benefits, supporting apprentices, and a guide to troubleshooting apprenticeship programs. So have a look at those if you haven't seen them already. And thank you very much for your time.